You're tuned into the
Counterflow
Podcast, home of dissident voices,
unapproved opinions.
But you gotta get ready.
You ready?
Now here's your host
and humble narrator,
Buck Johnson. Let's go.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again. This is the Counterflow Podcast, and as always, I am still your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of the barbecue capital of the world, Lockhart, Texas, with our friend of the show, co-host of the World War Now podcast, and he's up in Russia. My friend, your friend, Conrad Franz, is with us today, and you know, I was supposed to be on this trip up there in Russia, in Moldova, with our buddy Conrad. Some logistical things happened at the last minute. I was not able to make it. I hope to be up there at some point in the future with Conrad. But he's going to give us a report from the ground, if you will, on what's going on in Moldova and Russia with the church. The church is really the center of so much of what's happening politically in Moldova. And you may not know, well, Moldova is, I believe it's the highest percentage of Orthodox Christians in any country in the world, I think. And lo and behold, here comes some NATO-influenced, Western-influenced government people trying to subvert the Orthodox Church in Moldova the same way they're doing it in Ukraine. And Conrad's here to talk about it. He went there. Man, I'll just let him tell you, he's a brave man. He went to an area in Russia very close to what we might call the hot zone. And he tells us a startling experience that he had there, along with some good experiences that he had there. And we're sort of going to discuss what the heck's going on in Russia, Moldova, Ukraine, all of this with the church and politically, and the culture, what it's like there, what the trip's been like for our buddy Conrad. So I think you're going to love this. Without further ado, from far away at this moment, and it's nighttime there, daytime here, Conrad Franz from the World War Now podcast. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, Buck. Glad to be here. Like you said, 10 p.m. here in Moscow, rapidly cooling down as the winter approaches, but it's quite nice here. So good to be with you. Good to be talking. Good to be where I'm at.
Is that the hotel room that you're staying in, that you're sitting in?
This is the Russian equivalent of an Airbnb.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It's not like super fancy. The chandelier is nice, but like it's really small outside of this room. So
okay.
Mm-hmm.
It but a bit different from when you and I traveled overseas last summer. It looks like
yeah.
The digs are a little different.
Mm-hmm.
So we can. I'll let you at the end. Everyone that I think watches my show knows of yours, but we'll plug that stuff at the end. Let's get to so where you are, and some of my audience knows I was supposed to be there too. Maybe not as long, like I probably wouldn't still be there, but this has been a long trip for you. Can you talk about sort of where you've been and what this has been like?
Totally. So I left America. I left Austin on the 12th of September. And with my buddy Charles Balsman, we went over to Moldova. We flew into Chisinau. And for those who don't know where Moldova is, it's between Ukraine and Romania, Western Ukraine, Eastern Romania. And we were there to cover the persecution of the Orthodox Church there. So the Orthodox Church in Moldova, which is canonically under the Moscow Patriarchate, Patriarch Kirill, they are being heavily persecuted by the state there. There is this new thing called the Bessarabian metropolis that the Romanian Orthodox Church has formed, and through that are encroaching on the canonical territory of the Moldovan Orthodox Church. They have their own metropolitan Vladimir of Chisinau, and it's a very devout church. Moldova is actually the most Christian country in all of Europe, and it's one of the most traditional countries in all of Europe. And recently they had these elections, and it's all about EU integration and whether or not the country wants to join the EU and, separate itself from the Russian sphere of influence and fully enter, the neoliberal West. And that is a big motivating factor behind the persecution of the church, because obviously the church is a traditional element in society. I met with some amazing archbishops and metropolitans like Archbishop Markel, who came out. He was one of the strongest voices against the vaccine right when that was going on in the church. So he's a personal hero of mine. He was able to tell us many stories, and we'll get into all those stories here in a second. But after Chisinau, we then flew to Moscow, and we had a big program. We went to all sorts of churches and monasteries, met with all sorts of bishops. I met Archbishop Kirill, the abbot of Holy Trinity, Sergius Posad Lavra, which is where St. Sergius of Radonezh is. It's one of the biggest, most famous monasteries in all of Russia, sort of the quintessential Russian Muscovite monastery. We met a few other bishops. We met with Archbishop Sabas, the head of the missionary department for the Russian Orthodox Church. We met with Father Fyodor, who's in charge of the Russian Orthodox Church's Commission on Family Life and Anti-Abortion Measures, one of the strongest pro-life warriors I've ever met in my entire life. Truly a holy man, in my opinion. And after all of that was finished, we were here with some great people, James Dellingpole, John Henry Weston, our friend Tom here staying with me right now in this Airbnb. We had a great group of guys with us, saw all sorts of stuff in Russia. And then once that all ended up, most of the rest of the group flew on back to the States or wherever they were coming from. But I had the wonderful opportunity to go and spend 4 or 5 days in the Donbass in the Special Military Operations Zone with my good friend Andrei Afanasyev, who I've had on my program. He's the host of Spas, a few shows on Spas TV, which is the biggest Christian channel in Russia. It's on pretty much every TV you can turn on, it'll be on. And he's just at this point, I consider him a very close friend, a very inspiring character who he's been to Donbass 30 plus times as a war correspondent. He's, been in some real heavy stuff. And, he's always in touch with a lot of the Christian volunteers, the hardcore Orthodox people that are down there. He introduced me to some of his great friends, people down there that are, heroes from the early days of the Donbass War, 2014, some of the early 300 militia guys that stormed Slavyansk with Strelkov. This is some real warrior stuff. And, for example, I got this patch from the Tsar St. Nicholas Rocket Brigade, who are fighting against the Ukrainian secular schismatic menace right now. And I think, in general, I've been back just for a few days, and everyone I know that's been there says the same thing, that life feels way more real down there. Like now I feel like I'm back in like the simulation. Yeah. And down there, it's like everybody's living in the moment. You have to like watch the skies for drones. Like that's a real thing. And I guess the one story I'll say from down there before we maybe talk about Moldova and some of the other church persecution stuff, this is definitely church persecution related. If people check out my social media and even Donetsk social media, the public broadcasters and stuff down there, there was a huge event on Tuesday when I was there. It was my last day there. We went to this beautiful monastery that is basically almost completely destroyed. Like it's bullet holes in the entire church. The cupolas have collapsed and everything, but the sisters of the monastery never stopped doing services. We had the whole service inside the building, still this blown out building. And the Metropolitan of Donetsk, the Metropolitan of 2 other bishops, 35 priests, a bunch of people were there for the return of their copy of the Ivron icon. Actually, one second, I have it right here.
Yeah, we got to see this.
It's the well-known icon. You'll probably remember the Ivron icon on Mount Athos book was a top topic of conversation when we went, and their copy of it, this is their copy of it, and they have this huge version of it that's a very famous copy of the original that resided at this monastery that had been removed to be kept safe because it was on the front, this monastery was like at zero on the front line for years and years and years and years of the Ukrainian war. It's just outside of Donetsk. And finally, the Ukrainians have been pushed back far enough from the front that they're bringing the icon back to its original home in the monastery. And it was a huge deal. So it was a big deal there. News people were there. A huge amount of Russian National Guard were there to protect it and everything. And despite all of that, and despite the Ukrainians having been pushed back really far, 500 meters away, I wish I had it on video. I've been asking everybody that had a camera there for the video. It doesn't seem anybody got it on video, but 500 meters away in the cemetery of the monastery, the Ukrainians smacked us with a missile. And I heard it during the service. I heard when it shook the building, and I was like, whoa. And I'm like looking around, and everybody there was unperturbed because they've all been living in Donetsk for years and years and years. And I guess they're just used to that kind of thing. But I'm like, man, what was that? And later, our sort of guide, our main guy there, that was, he'd been fighting in Donbass back since 2014. He was like, yeah, that was actually like some kind of newer European weapon that the Ukrainians tried to hit us with. And the only thing we could think they were trying to do was to hit the service that was going on, to kill the metropolitan, to kill this big group of priests that obviously are, pro-Russian. The priest and bishop there regularly bless the Orthodox Christian residents that have volunteered to fight or have been, entered into the battle there. I actually did the first ever interview with Metropolitan Mitrofan of Gorlovka, which is one of the bigger cities in Donetsk. He's never spoken to a journalist, Russian or Western, at all until now. I was the first person to interview him. So wow. Dmitry is working on the translation and the subtitles for that. So the whole trip was incredible. And, seeing what's happening in Ukraine, seeing that the persecution there that started in 2018 with Patriarch Bartholomew giving the Tomos of autocephaly to the schismatics there and going to the war zone now, it makes me realize how important the situation in Moldova is, because in Moldova, it's about to be Ukraine 2.0 as far as the schism is concerned. And I wouldn't be surprised if the ecumenical patriarch started putting pressure on the Romanians saying, hey, Romanian church, we'll totally recognize the Bessarabian metropolis if you just recognize the schismatics in Ukraine for us. So unfortunately, the Romanian church, which has been strong on the Ukraine issue up until now, I think they're the most in danger of being sort of cleaved away from orthodoxy into the ecumenical patriarch's schismatic vision right now. And I think the Moldova situation is the kind of the epicenter of that battle.
Wow, the missile thing, dude, what a story. I mean, we thought an earthquake on Mount Athos was startling. I can't imagine a missile blowing up nearby. I want to ask you, since you were there in the Donbass area, and you spoke with a lot of these guys, what are their thoughts on America? And Trump, for lack of a better, example, but what do they think about us and what we're doing? And we collectively as the U.S., not me and you specifically.
No, this idea that they're all like hating America obviously is just not true. I mean, I interviewed the Alexander Nevsky Volunteer Brigade. I have one of their patches back over there. And those guys are all Orthodox, serious Christians, serious Russian nationalists. But like the guy that I interviewed the most, the funnest guy there, he was wearing a New York Yankees hat. Like okay. They thought they liked America. They like Trump. They think Trump is cool. They think Trump is a lot better than, Biden and the people before. But obviously they liked talking to me because I, was Orthodox and I understood the conflict and I understood the roots of it and everything. And I told them there's a lot more people like me than they might think. Yeah. And they were sort of aware of that. They vaguely keep up with certain things in American media. But at the end of the day, they also know that the bullets firing towards them on the battlefield were given through American taxpayer dollars. But there definitely is, I would say, less of a resentment towards America explicitly than there is a resentment against like the EU countries and the countries there, because there's less people in those countries that feel the way we do. America has a much larger alt media space, and the alt media space has really done a lot of good work, I think, in demystifying the Ukraine conflict and making sure people don't think it's this mythical conflict between good and evil with the Western civilization holding back like the Russian orcs or something. And I remember Metropolitan Mitrofan of Gorlovka and my friend Andre, they were talking. Andre was like, yeah, we were at this beautiful cathedral that they had built, the Metropolitan had helped build in the past few years. Insane, beautiful architecture, beautiful domes. And he's like, they call us orcs, but this architecture looks pretty elvish to me. So that was sort of, that kind of rhetoric is largely coming out of the EU and stuff like that. So there's a big awareness for that. I know that France and the UK have been more willing to give like longer range missiles and stuff. I remember a guy was saying the missile that might have struck near the church, we think it might have been like a Swiss missile or a French or something like that. So that's a very real thing, and the people there are very aware of who is providing the weapons. And this has sort of been a thing my whole trip here, meeting all these different Russians and people in Moldova, is I think there is actually a natural affinity between Russians and Americans in a lot of ways. We're part of these huge countries with these vast frontiers, religious population, European heritage and whatnot. But unfortunately, I think the shadowy powers that be have orchestrated a situation where we are at each other's throats, much like the First and Second World Wars were orchestrated for similar purposes, pitting European empires against one another.
As you guys know, the team at Podsworth Media has worked with me for a long time producing this show. A big part of that over the past couple of years has been them using their Podsworth app to make the audio sound clean, level, professional, even when the raw recordings were super sketchy, which mine can be sometimes. In fact, This one that you're listening to right now is super sketchy. I took this microphone sock off here just to show you how crappy it will sound, except when they put it through the Podsworth app, it sounds beautiful. I've got this annoying white noise maker going on. It's driving me crazy. If you want to hear how bad this recording is before they put it through the Podsworth app, you can hear the full before and after demo for yourself at the link in the description. The app recently got a huge update and it's better than ever. So good, in fact, that it can take almost any atrocious voice recordings and make it sound great. They remove background noise, it cuts down on plosives, it fixes clipping when your gain is too high, it reduces reverb, removes clicks, pops, improves tone, and the level of the dialogue is even and consistent. So if I move around like this, which I sometimes do when I get excited, it'll fix all of that. It's super simple. Go to podsworth.com, click Get Started, drag and drop your audio files, or open them right from your smartphone browser. Customize your settings if you want, but honestly, the default works great for most podcast recordings. Here's the cool part. Enter code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. No account needed, just email and payment. Then you get the download link in your inbox with your cleaned up files. It's perfect for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, homilies, audiobooks, anything like that you want to sound legitimate and professional. Remember, use code BUCK50 for half off your first order. And you're supporting this show. Thank you, guys.
Have you noticed, this is your second at least. How many times have you been to Russia?
It's my third trip.
Third, okay. Western misconceptions that you hear from when you're back home, not necessarily amongst your, tight-knit circle, but just out and about, boomers, media, etc., versus the reality that you see there on the ground?
The weirdest thing I hear is there's this idea that it's like a really unsafe place, that there's like a crime problem. I don't know why people think that. Genuinely, I have no idea why, but it's an extremely safe country. I mean, I literally drove 17 hours from Moscow to Donetsk straight. And sure, there's poor parts, there's rich parts, there's suburbs, there's exurbs, there's villages with not a lot of money, but there was never a place where I felt unsafe. There was never a place where you feel like, I'm sorry, it doesn't feel like O Block or, the bad parts of Houston or Waco and some of these places that we all know. And that's not to say that, a big difference I've noticed in a lot of Europe is in general, they don't have like suburbia the same way. Like the cities are nice, the cities are clean, well-to-do people that aren't even necessarily super wealthy are able to live in decent proximity to the center of the city, which isn't really the experience in America. Like I grew up in the suburbs. Everyone I knew going to the private school that I went to grew up in the suburbs. Upper middle class people all left the city and live sort of outside the city for any safety, affordability, any of these sorts of things. And it's very different here. You have all sorts of people living in the city, and then you have all sorts of people living in the massive high-rise apartments outside the city as well. It's just a sort of totally different urban environment. But in general, I mean, the only place where I encountered, people say like Russians don't even have running water. The only place where that was an issue was in Donetsk because the Ukrainians have blocked the Slavyansk Canal that provides all of Donetsk with fresh water. So, for example, only about half the days I was there was I able to like take a shower. So that's real. But the rest of Russia is not like that at all. It's, very, very modern, very developed. And sure, it's, every European country is much poorer than the United States. I mean, look at Spain. The average salary in Spain is like $22,000 a year, but cost of living is much, much lower. Food here is very cheap. Electricity here is obviously extremely cheap. So, as somebody who's been, I've been covering the issues in Russia for a long time, and now it's my third trip. I've sort of had most of the misconceptions flushed out of me. But, in general, there's on certain things that are much better. I mean, the Moscow subway system is probably the nicest subway system almost in existence. It's just incredible. So there's a lot of public, the public parks are really good, obviously, with the more, powerful centralized government in general. They're able to do a lot more with that. And there's some very incredible public works that have been done between public transportation, parks, and even, the cathedrals. The mayor of Moscow in 2005 is the one that rebuilt Christ the Savior Cathedral, the massive, beautiful cathedral where, if you tune into the Nativity service or the Pascha service of the Russian Patriarch, that's where you'll see it happening. And that was very much funded by the government. So you sort of see what a Christian government is sort of capable of in its early stages now, which America's not really there yet.
No. Well, we're funding the missiles that are being fired at them. St. Petersburg, did you go there as well?
No, I haven't been to
You
St. Petersburg yet. I'm the only person probably that's been to Russia 3 times and been to the Donbass and still haven't made it to St. Petersburg. My buddy Tom, who's been on the trip with us, he made it up to St. Petersburg while I was in Donetsk, and he had just great things to say about it. I need to make it to the Hermitage Museum. I need to make it to St. Isaac's, all these really famous places. So next time, I am going back to the Donbass at the end of this month, actually.
Wow.
So I got invited to speak at a conference there. So that's happened.
All right, let's talk about Moldova. The my audience that listens on a regular basis has heard Father John Whiteford probably talk about it. I believe the last trip he went there, he was saying the priest that he knew, he wasn't able to speak with him. I believe he was in the hospital. And while the guy was in the hospital, the government tried to come and take the parish and overtake it, but his Matushka got there and locked the doors or something along these lines. I assume now that story does not surprise you in any way as to what you've seen there.
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, literally, the whole trip was these priests like trying to just like, look, this is just kind of how it is. Like one of the first priests we met with, Father Nikolai, he is the rector of the only parish in Chisinau that does services in Slavonic and Russian because most people in Moldova speak Russian. It was obviously part of the Soviet Union. It was at one point part of the Russian Empire. Only very briefly after 1940 was it, sort of part of Romania and influenced by Romania. And the situation, for example, at this parish, which is just an Orthodox parish that does services in Slavonic, we have dozens of them in the United States, for example. We sat down in his parish office, and he said, the first thing he says is like, look, this office is completely bugged, so just be careful what you say. The government's listening to us. And we're like, okay, noted. We went to a village about 2 hours north of Chisinau, and that was where we heard the craziest story, where basically their priest, who's total scumbag, was bribed away from the canonical church. That's what's really happening is they're offering $60,000, $70,000 yearly salaries, which that makes you like one of the richest people in Moldova if you can make that kind of money. From Romania, from the Romanian church, coming from the EU, they offer priests these huge salaries to basically steal their parishes away from the canonical church, bring them into the Bessarabian metropolis. And this priest, apparently he only needed 10 signatures from his parish to sort of really approve the transfer of the church in the eyes of the government, because the government has a big say in like church affairs here, and these buildings are considered historical monuments. So the government's using that as sort of an imposition on the parish communities. He couldn't even get 10 people in his parish to agree to it. He got like 9 people to sign, and half of them he like lied to them about what they were signing. And in the midst of all of that, his parishioners had to basically like gang together and physically remove him from the parish. But the police stood by and supported the schismatic priest. And later on, after they kicked him out, their bishop obviously defrocked him, sent them a new priest who obviously wasn't going to do any of this. The old priest broke into the church, cut all the wires for the heating so they couldn't heat the church in the winter. He stole all of the tongues out of the bells so they can't ring the bells at the church. And he started squatting in the rectory where the parish priest is supposed to live, right adjacent to the church.
Yeah.
He just stays there and doesn't let anybody else move. And literally, we were in this parish talking to these people. They were telling us all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, he's over there like 10 feet away in that building right now. And we're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
and it's just, it's clear that unfortunately, the worst priests are going to be the people that fall for this. If you're willing to give up canonical orthodoxy for a paycheck, so it's sort of in many ways, I guess it's almost good that these people learn like, oh, I guess our priest was never really on the team. But these poor people in this village, now their new priest barely makes any money. They're facing all this pressure. They don't have any bells to ring. There's like the electricity's all messed up. They had to rewire everything. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is just the craziest thing I've ever heard. This is a country that's an EU candidate. The European Union is ostensibly supporting this when they claim to be all about religious freedom and tolerance and all this sort of thing. But fundamentally, it's happening because the people in Moldova and perhaps people in the EU telling them this, they think that once we purge the church and once we purge Moldova of Russian influence, then we'll be welcomed with open arms into the Eurozone, into the European family, as they like to call it. And that's really what's going on there. I mean, we talked to Archbishop Markel, we talked to a few other bishops and priests, because these priests are part of, the rest of the Orthodox world. They try to go see the Holy Fire in Jerusalem. They go for concelebrations with their fellow bishops in Russia. Russia, the largest Orthodox country. Of course, any Orthodox priest would, in theory, be interested in going at some point, but they don't allow them to. If you're a bishop, for example, Bishop Markel, He's been detained 3 times at the airport for just trying to leave the country, go to Jerusalem twice. One of them was going to Uzbekistan for a Khan celebration. And what they do, and this happens, there was one bishop, I believe, Bishop Piotr, has been stopped at the airport and at border checkpoints 28 times by the authorities of Moldova. And basically what they do is they detain them, they bring them into a room or whatever, and they just keep them there until they miss their flight or they miss whatever event they were going to, or their hotel reservations, get expired. And then they're like, okay, well, you can go, but you just have to go back to where you went in Moldova. They search through all their stuff. They, very, inappropriate levels of invasion for clerical figures. And that's how they basically segregate and prevent these bishops, frankly, from even going and talking about the persecution to other, bishops and other members of the Orthodox Church. So it really is crazy. And one of the things that struck me the most was almost all the priests told me the same thing. Like, what we're experiencing right now is worse than the Soviet times.
Wow. And the irony is some of the powers in the West sort of infer that like, all these people really want to go back to the Soviet Union, meaning like the good Russian and the parts of that church. And, he was part of the KGB and they want to, and it's like what they're doing from the Western perspective or the Western, what they're doing, their tactics are the Soviet tactics or worse, as you were saying. It's sad. And I guess there's going to be these priests like the ones squatting there that take the pinch of incense, so to speak. But I think a lot of people in the West, in America, maybe don't realize how much of what's going on in Ukraine, Russia, Donbass, Moldova now, Romania, is really centered around the church. Does it seem to be something people over there do grasp because it's sort of their whole life?
Well, yeah, because the people, these people aren't necessarily that political. They might speak Russian because that was what they grew up speaking. But this idea that they're going out and marching with like a Putin flag or like going out, like, if anything, the things they go out and march for, they do like anti-pride protest parades. Like there'll be a pride parade in Chisinau and the church will organize the like traditional family parade, for example. That's the kind of things that they're motivated by. And so it's very, very obvious to them that the church, what they love the most, is the main obstacle to the sort of Prague secular agenda that comes with being integrated into the European Union, integrated into the West. And for example, a priest was helping lead his parish community at one of these marches, and the police just like beat the crap out of him and threw him on the ground and these are traditional, like you think I highly doubt these police officers actually support LGBT nonsense. They're like Moldovan police officers, but they're just marching to the tune of the Maia Sandu, who's the current prime minister of Moldova, and she's a Romanian citizen, a total, in many ways, there's a large population of people that want Moldova to be fully integrated back into Romania. And I'm not really going to comment on the politics there. That's for the people of Moldova really to decide for themselves. But fundamentally, Russian is one of the most commonly spoken languages. And even if this idea that the church there is somehow Russian isn't really true. There's only one parish in all of Chisinau that even does the services in Slavonic. The vast majority of the parishes under the Metropolitan of Chisinau and under Patriarch Kirill do the services in Romanian Moldovan. So it's not really some like impositional imperial sort of thing that these people are under with the Russians. It's just they're Orthodox and they know how the ecclesiology works and they have their bishops, and you don't just choose a different bishop because you want to. That's called like schism, you know what I mean?
Yes,
so everybody, they understand all this stuff. They go, literally, I've heard this, people, they listen, they want to hear Patriarch Kirill commemorated at the liturgy because that's how they know they're with the correct church in Moldova, not new thing.
My church does it, right? Yeah. It's like real core parishes. And again, we don't go and march out with pictures of Vladimir Putin. It's just that's the hierarchy of the church, and that's who we're under. It's interesting that it's sad.
And
really,
and like Rokor has its own synod. Rokor has a whole own synod separate from the Moscow Patriarch. Same with the church in Moldova. They have a synod. It's not like the decisions that the bishops make are directed from Moscow. It's just how the hierarchy works, how the ecclesiology works. They're autonomous, not autocephalous. That's not that different, but it's still different. We can't just be given, that's the idea, I guess, the EP has. We can't just be given autocephaly everywhere we go. That's not really how the church has functioned throughout all of history.
I believe they just had this election in Moldova. Is that correct?
They did, and unfortunately, it didn't go well. Maia Sandu, her party won, I think, just over 50% of the vote. And one of the big scandals, of course, is apparently a lot of the local Moldovan people that would have voted for the quote-unquote more pro-Russian parties were intimidated out of voting. And one of the biggest interferences, and this has occurred in previous Moldovan elections, of course, the largest Moldovan diaspora in the world is obviously in Russia. 650,000 Moldovans live in Russia. And for a country of 2.5 million people, that's a huge percentage of the voting population. But what they do every time...
2 polling locations or something like that.
Yes, they set up 2 polling locations in the entirety of Russia. I think it's like 1 in Moscow, 1 in St. Petersburg. I don't know. It almost doesn't matter how long you hold the election for. Let's say it's a week long. 650,000 people can't vote at 2 polling stations that much, especially all those people that might live in provincial Russia or somewhere else. They're going to have to, drive 6 hours to go vote? So that alone is extreme levels of voter suppression. I mean, I'm even hearing from people I know here that are just friends with Moldovans that the Moldovan embassy here is totally screwing the Moldovan diaspora in Russia over, not helping them with their remittances, not helping them with their visas, not helping them with travel and everything. So it's sort of a full spectrum dominance. And Moldova is just too small and poor of a country to sort of stand up against this massive influx of cash and influence that the West has unlimited amounts of.
We've got a new sponsor. It is Perfect Spiral Capital. This is the infinity banking concept. Break free from the system. Perfect Spiral Capital helps you build wealth on your terms outside of the control of the corporate banking cartel and the state-manipulated markets. Invest like a dissident, a true dissident. Take ownership of your financial future with strategies designed for those who refuse to be cogs in the machine. No handouts, no bailouts, just real results. Opt out, build wealth. The state inflates your savings away while Wall Street rigs the game. You guys know this. Perfect Spiral Capital helps you stack real assets and create lasting independence. Go to perfectspiralcapital.com/counterflow and get a special offer for fans of this show. Again, that's perfectspiralcapital.com/counterflow. And there was a lot of polling locations in areas where a lot of Western or Europeans were.
All over Western Europe. I'm sure they would have just taken your vote no matter where you were. But a big thing in Moldova that people might not know is maybe geography nerds like myself are aware of. People call it Transnistria in the West. Its official name is the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic. And that wasn't really on the agenda because for our trip, but I made sure that in our free time, we went to Tiraspol, the capital, because it's like a country within a country. It's like the only like fully functional state that isn't recognized by anybody, which just fascinates me. But the reason it wasn't on the agenda for the people showing us the church persecution was because there obviously is no church persecution in Transnistria because they have border controls. They are, many would say basically just a little Russian satellite state. There's a Russian base there. And obviously the Metropolitan of Tiraspol, all the churches there, nobody is going to the Bessarabian Metropolia. Nobody's getting beat up. All this stuff isn't happening because they've separated themselves from the rest of Moldova as this sort of pseudo-state. And the one thing I can say is Tiraspol, oh my gosh, it's just an incredible city, just a beautiful, beautiful European city. And people think of the PMR Transnistria as this like backwards Soviet exclave because the flag has the hammer and sickle on it. It's very Soviet. And the reason it exists, for anyone that doesn't know the history, was in the 90s, early 90s, as the Soviet Union was breaking up, one of the first Soviet socialist republics to leave the USSR was Moldova. They voted to leave and become independent, much like a lot of the other former Soviet countries eventually ended up doing. And the Pridnestrovians, the Transnistrians, the people just on the other side of the Dnieper, closer to the Ukraine border, fundamentally, they had never been part of Moldova. It's much like how, Lenin and Stalin gave Crimea to Ukraine, despite it never being historically a part of Ukraine. Pridnestrovia was very much like that with Moldova. It was just sort of the communists sort of drew the line the way they did, and now these people that have never been part of Moldova are now part of Moldova. And so they fought a small war, like hundreds and hundreds of people have died. We saw a big memorial to them with a beautiful icon commemorating them in a very Christian way in Tiraspol. And there was a war fought between the Moldovan forces and these Pridnestrovian separatists, and they won. And to this day, they have their little state of 280,000 people just along the Dniester River. And yes, they have a lot of, for example, their old government building still has a big statue of Lenin in front of it. Yes, the flag still has the hammer and sickle on it. But if you talk to the president, Vadim Krasnoselsky, he would say, and it's like one of my favorite quotes of any politician recently, he said, people accuse us of being a sliver of the Soviet Union. I say no. I say we're actually a sliver of the Russian Empire. And he's like a huge imperial historian. And you look at all the new statues that have been built as opposed to the ones that were built under the Soviet times, and they're all imperial. The biggest statue in Tiraspol is of Suvorov. One of the biggest statues they have is of Catherine the Great, who obviously is the one that, initially brought all of this part of the world under Russia. The church is very prominent in town. There's icons everywhere. And like I said, more prominent even than, because they have a big World War II memorial about the liberation of Odessa, because Tiraspol is not far from Odessa at all in Ukraine, how Tiraspol was, liberated from the Germans by the Russians back in the day. But the more prominent central monument is the Transnistria War veterans, and it's all Christian. Like, it's all icons and the Virgin Mary and prayers and everything like that. So as much as, yes, there is a bit of a Soviet thing to it, I love the PMR because it's actually very imperial, and they're sort of a holdout of this Russian imperial identity. And it's one of the things people keep talking about with the Russia-Ukraine war is if Russia does eventually make it to Odessa, then they'd be able to connect to Transnistria, the PMR, and those people would, in theory, be able to sort of rejoin the family they'd always wanted to stay part of and why they fought the Transnistrian War. But I encourage anybody to visit Moldova. It's a beautiful country. I heard one of the most beautiful choirs I ever heard at the Chalci Monastery, I believe, in just central Moldova. And going to Tiraspol was a great experience. I wanted to be able to spend more time there, but I was shocked at how clean and the infrastructure and the architecture and the beauty of Tiraspol, which no one even knows exists. It was one of the prettiest European city centers I've been to in a hot minute. So I encourage anyone to visit.
Are they in danger of this Western government via Romania trying to take them over?
Well, I think in theory there could be, people in Moldova sometimes talk about mounting like some military operation against the PMR, but Moldova doesn't really have much of a military. They don't really have much of an ability to do that. And frankly, if Moldova, let's say, ever gets integrated into Romania, which is possible, there's a lot of popular parties in Moldova that have run on that platform, maybe they would just give up on the Transnistria issue. But ultimately, it all is going to be decided by what happens in Ukraine. Like, if Russia takes more and more territory in Ukraine, then the Transnistrians will easily be able to go to that. But if the Russians, let's say the line stops where it is right now, they might be in trouble because there's no land connection between them and the Russians. The Russian troops there, the Russian ammo depot there the Russians would probably just pull those guys out so they wouldn't be, they wouldn't get messed up. So it's an interesting question. And like I said, the reason it's better right now to be in Transnistria than the other places is because none of this Bessarabian metropolis schism stuff is affecting them because they just wouldn't let any of those people pass their border checkpoints that they have. So in many ways, that shows you how, if Moldova still was, like they claim, this like quote unquote Russian satellite state, they would be more protected from this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And obviously, the Moldovans aren't necessarily pining to join Russia. They're just pining to do their own thing, to be independent, to not have massive amounts of foreign influence being what impacts their elections, being what impacts their church, their media. I mean, all like Russian language media there, despite it being one of them, like literally vast majority of people also speak Russian there. Some people even speak Russian better than they speak Romanian. All the Russian language media has basically been completely banned. So it's major levels of repression and persecution.
What did I heard you say on a World War Now episode, something about how bad the media, the radio and TV, that they're sort of only stuff they're given there is?
Oh, I mean, the propaganda is just egregious. And a lot of it's just the same as you get with the Romanian propaganda. And, Romanians have been extremely propagandized against Russians. In Eastern Europe, that's just the main goal, is making everybody over there hate Russia because they know that's important to maintaining these NATO bases. Romania has one of the biggest NATO bases in Europe inside of it. They have a Black Sea coast of their own. So in many ways, NATO knows that when they inevitably do have to confront Russia in the Black Sea, they need Romania on side. And I mean, literally, we literally were there. We made a few posts initially about the persecution. We interviewed people, we posted their interviews, we told their stories. And within 2 days, there's Romanian media articles that are getting blasted into Moldova about how me and Charles Bausman are funded by the Russians and we're these horrible agents and all this stuff. And it's just like, I mean, with what evidence? Like, it's not really that there's not really any research or reporting or like deep in-depth analysis. It's just like blatant propaganda. Like, and as much as like people have heard that a lot when talking about the American media, but it's like a little bit more egregious when you've also just like blatantly banned all the other popular news stations that people used to watch. And unfortunately, people in these places are so used to this kind of thing from like the Soviet times that unfortunately they're it isn't quite as jarring to them. Like if this happened, if something like this, for example, happened in America where like there was this big schism and it was being propagandized in the media and then they banned all this stuff, people would kind of figure out what was going on because it would be so obvious. But unfortunately, so much of this stuff is tribal and linguistic, and certain people have been boxed into like, no, you're a Romanian, you need to have this perspective. And even if you are traditional and conservative, it's better to just bite the bullet and enjoy the pride parades and the abortion and all this kind of stuff than it is to be, to be subjugated by the Russian oppressors. That's the sort of propaganda they're getting.
Isn't it interesting how when Western, quote unquote, Western culture is pushed down the throats of people like this, they use things which lead to eugenics, essentially, like abortion, pride parades. It's like anything that can get people from like repopulating an area. Well, let's wipe that out. What are the thoughts of like the people that you talk to in Moldova about sort of the degenerate culture that we're used to seeing?
Well, people in Moldova just makes the conservative people very sad because these are countries that have some of the lowest birth rates in the world. These former communist states, these European places, they need to be having more children. And unfortunately, abortion has always been a huge problem in the former Soviet Union.
Yes.
But it had been going down. The church had been having a positive influence. For here in Russia, used to be the abortion capital. I mean, the Soviet Union was the first country in the world to legalize abortion. And now, slowly but surely, more and more regions are outlawing abortion from the private. Like in Crimea, for example, Metropolitan Tikhon led an entire movement for all the private clinics there to agree to not do any more abortions. So that's a huge victory there. The Russian abortion rate, I believe, this was before Roe versus Wade ended, so it's probably flipped back now. But before Roe versus Wade was overturned in America, Russia had a lower abortion rate than the United States, just barely, but it had sort of equalized. And Moldova, these other countries, unfortunately, had massive rates, but they were declining. But now we see, for example, I read a whole article about how these new telehealth, the big pharma is one of the big investors that comes into these places. In Russia, that's still the main Western money that's still sort of here that hasn't kicked out of the SMO is pharma. And a lot of it has to do with abortion pills, birth control pills. That's really, really being pushed by German and American and British corporations that still have contracts here for some reason. And, there's a legacy of communism. There are still people here that think that stuff's important for women or whatever. And in Moldova, it's the same thing. For example, they had even launched a whole program to allow the people that live in Transnistria, who there's a lot less abortion there per se, to have access to these telehealth medicine meetings where the doctors will just prescribe abortion pills to the women, without even an in-person consultation. So that's one of the things that is really being pushed by the government. It's really being pushed by the Romanian government, that people keep putting in the money. So whatever progress was being made, the church slowly chipping away at this horrible legacy of abortion, is totally being reversed now by their integration into the European Union. And of course, the Pride Parade thing is just so alien to those people that, it's just these, young people in these places, there's still some nihilism and whatnot that adopt all these, liberal Western attitudes. And a certain level, the normal traditional people almost don't even know what to do with that because it's so foreign and alien. They're just like obviously disgusted by it. So there's always huge counter protests. And that's why there's been the actual physical police repression, because they know that even to Americans, conservative Americans, if they see a huge pro-family rally and then the smaller pro-gay rally and the police beating up the people in the pro-family rally, those are going to be pretty visceral images. I know people in America, it took a long time for them to finally start to figure out what was going on in Ukraine. And then we all saw the video from the cathedral in Cherkasy, right? Where the masked guys storm and they're just beating up the priests, beating people up, pooping in the altar, this disgusting demonic stuff. And that's the kind of image that even, an uneducated, simple conservative American could see, like, okay, I think maybe we're the bad guys in this situation.
Yes. Right. How did those guys, the gentleman you spoke with in the Donbass, and I know you mentioned a lot of more Orthodox, and they gave you the patch and whatnot. What are their thoughts on Ukraine? Let's say, I almost look at this like the war between the states and back in the 1860s here. The government versus in a way, it's like you're fighting your brothers. What are their thoughts on that sort of dynamic?
No, there's a lot of sadness behind it. And I remember I specifically asked, that this might roundabout answer your question. I asked in when I post the interview, everyone can see the full response. I asked, so how does your Christian faith inform your battle tactics? How does it inform how you treat the enemy when you encounter them on the battlefield? And what they said was, we don't show any mercy in the battlefield to the enemy, but that doesn't mean that we dehumanize them. And we recognize that Ukrainians are in many ways our lost brothers that have basically been indoctrinated with this new identity to hate us. And it is a tragedy. And, they say that we still pray for them and everything. And we don't, they call us orcs and dehumanize us. We don't necessarily do the same to them, but that doesn't mean, unfortunately, it's war. And the point of when you're a soldier, everyone talks about it's about honor, it's about this, that, and the other. The war happens and your goal is to kill the enemy. That's what happens. And I did also ask them about how, because a lot of these guys, for example, were fighting in 2014 and are still there now. And they saw how drastically the type of warfare changed after the SMO began. And they do, these guys are still, warriors that are trying to fight honorably. But they say the drone warfare is it just takes any form of respect or honor or dignity out of warfare. And it's just this pure mechanized sort of hellscape. And I don't have any video of the audio of the missile striking nearby as we walked up to that monastery for that same service in the Donbass. I do have a video of a Ukrainian drone just flying right overhead over to hit some other target, I guess somewhere else. But it's just if that thing turned down and blew us up, it would have blown us up. So it's really crazy. And unfortunately, people will see this when I release more of the video content that I made deeper into the SMO zone, closer to the gray zone itself. We were near Ugledar, who I'm sure people have heard about. Ugledar on the front line was one of the main cities that was fought over. We went to St. Nicholas Church, as well as Nikolskaya Monastery, which was started by Elder Zosima of Donbass, who reposed in 2002 and prophesied pretty much the entire Ukraine war that we're seeing today. We talk about him on the show a decent amount. We went to the church, and at one point the church was sort of the dividing line. Like the Ukrainian front line was on one side of the church and the Russians were on the other side, and it was, the battlefield of overhead. And I walk in and I make a video where I talk about this. You could see the Ukrainian side, massive artillery holes all in the church, just blown up everywhere. They were indiscriminate. They did not care if they destroyed the church. Maybe that was even their goal. And the side where the Russians, look, there were some bullet holes, some things but there was no explosions. The roof was still standing, nothing on the, It was like a very, very stark contrast between who actually cared about the church and who was fighting for the Christian people there versus who, frankly, sees the Christian temples there as sort of a nuisance.
We've got some new shirts, Counterflow with Buck Johnson on the front pocket, on the back. A beautiful graphic with, of course, dissident voices and unapproved opinions. You can see this on the YouTube version of the show, of course. We're putting the graphic up now. $30 flat fee. $30 gets you the t-shirt. The PayPal address is buck@counterflowpodcast.com. That is my PayPal. You can send $30 that method. Send me your address and the size you want. We have sizes small through 2XL. Again, sizes small through 2XL. Go to PayPal, $30, buck@counterflowpodcast.com. Give me your address in there and the t-shirt will be yours. Yeah, for sure. Do they understand like the coup in 2014, that how America's role and some of that stuff?
Oh, everybody in Donbass understands that. That's definitely I don't think you'd meet a single person there that would feel any differently. I was able to I actually interviewed the deputy foreign minister of the Donetsk People's Republic, and if people watch the interview, she just gives a crash course on the whole history of what happened, and it's clear that, they have a lot of memorials there to the children that have been killed in the bombings. I went to Gorlovka, which is a city of about 300, before the war was like 350,000 people north of Donetsk. And they have a whole museum dedicated to the, at this point it's more, but the 27 children that have been killed by bombs there under the age of, 17 and under. One of them was like a baby that was like barely 1 year old. And these are people that, just got indiscriminately blown up by missiles from the Ukrainians. And there's a big consciousness around why it happened, about how, because those places were all parts of Ukraine. You used to be able to just travel there like you would any other part of Ukraine. And everyone remembers the election map, all of Donbass, all of the Black Sea coast, all of those people voted for Yanukovych, the Russian language party, the people that were protecting the rights of Russian speakers in Ukraine. And when the Maidan happened, that's why those specific regions decided to, rise up, because initially it actually wasn't even them that started the fighting. We know that in Odessa, the city hall or the library was burned down with all the Russians inside of it. We know the video of them crucifying that Russian guy in Odessa. And of course, we know in Slavyansk and in these other parts of Western Donetsk, these like Banderite, Ukrainian identity, Nazi type soldiers were going in there and, starting to harass people, kill people. And so that's why Strelkov and his 300 guys, some of whom I met, went in there and fought back and secured the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, which were unrecognized independent states for 8 years, from 2014 to 2022, when Putin finally recognized their independence. Then they held the referendums, and then they officially joined the Russian Federation. So these people are keenly aware of this because they had to form and maintain their own country for 8 years despite massive international pressure and literal bombs. And so the narrative and the understanding of why they had to do that is very well understood there.
Have you heard a lot of discussion on Israel and and their tentacles?
There definitely is an understanding, especially as Russia has gotten closer and closer with Iran, that Israel is no friend, and that the United States and Israel are sort of joined at the hip. But I mean, people do know. I mean, there is a solid Jewish connection with Russia. I mean, Putin himself talked about the 2 million Russian speakers in Israel. So there's not necessarily as in America, there's obviously a massive anti-Zionist fervor right now because there's huge backlash against our support. Russia was never as Zionist as the U.S. was, so there's not necessarily this huge backlash. I mean, Russia's always recognized Palestine. Right after October 7th, Russia even hosted a Hamas delegation, coming to Moscow. So they've always sort of played both sides. But the people in Donbass, the soldiers and those people are they're very clued in. They're very conservative. They're very nationalistic. They're very they know about them boys, as it were, sort of. So I think I heard a lot of, just the type of banter that we would hear at an Orthodox, men's night or something like that. There's definitely a lot of that. But, there also is an awareness that, for example, like the Azov Battalion and some of these really egregious, terroristic type groups in Ukraine. I mean, Azov, despite claiming to be like neo-Nazi, they go to Israel like every year, and you see them dancing with the people there. So, and Israel has secretly given Ukraine a lot of weapons that the people on the front line have been, wait a second, these are Israeli weapons. So there's a lot more Israeli volunteers, I think, fighting on the Ukrainian side than the Russian side. So that's very much come to the fore. And like I said, just recently, I'm sure if people have been watching the news, Russia is sending MiG-29s. They're trying to get the Su-35 as soon as they can to Iran. So it's clear that unlike the 12-day war, where unfortunately Russia sort of stood by and watched it happen, which, I think the jury is still out on I don't really view it as being a complete war. I think that was just the appetizer. I think this month or November, we're going to see the next Iran-Israel phase. But I think this next time it heats up, Russia's going to intervene more on the side of Iran. That would not surprise me at all, with the air defense deliveries and the jets that they've provided.
Based on discussions you've had there and then your own research, which I understand is a lot and in depth, what do you think happens with Russia, Ukraine, NATO in this scenario coming in the next few months?
We're like totally in uncharted territory at this point because Trump seems to have, done everything he could to try to achieve peace. And clearly he wasn't willing to promise the Russians enough, or the Russians just don't trust the promises. I mean, what was it? It was Lavrov and Putin basically said, our position has changed. Nothing about the Alaska summit affected anything about our decision making. Basically, that was had nothing to do with anything. It was basically just kayfabe. And it was basically just a PR victory for the Russians to make it seem like they're, really negotiating, when in reality, they are winning the war on the ground. And it's clear that I think this war is going to be fought to its conclusion. We see J.D. Vance openly talking about how Trump wants to give Tomahawk missiles to the Ukrainians. And Zelensky just said that Trump gave him the green light to strike hard with advanced weapons deep in the center of Moscow. So here I am, not far from the center of Moscow, really hoping that doesn't happen. And if it does, I mean, it's almost one of those things where Russia, as I've said for a long time, is regrettably reactive. Like especially compared to the Gaza war, the civilian casualties in Gaza surpassed the Ukraine war within the first few months of that war even going on. And because the Russians because fundamentally a lot of this territory is territory that they want to be Russian, so they have no interest in wiping out the population there. They have no interest in making the people there hate them even more than they already do, as they've been propagandized. Whereas the Ukrainians know it's extremely unlikely that we ever actually get Donetsk back, so they just are interested in terrorizing the people. What is the strategic benefit of blowing up the church that me, 35 priest and Metropolitan Vladimir of Donetsk was in? That's just war motivation for the Satanists that were probably firing the missiles, and just demotivation and psychological warfare basically against the local population. It's a totally different mindset that the two sides really have. And unfortunately at this point, I guess the upside is I do think Russia is being forced into a position where they're going to have to fight this war to a final conclusion, not sign another Minsk III agreement that just kicks the can down the road another 5 years, which I think there are still people in the Russian sphere that would be willing to do something like that. I think the brazenness of the Ukrainians, the brazenness of the West, the fact that Trump is seems willing to escalate on the side of Zelensky, that's going to force the Russians to, I think, do what always had to be done from the beginning. And the idea, Trump used to say that he was going to end the Ukraine war before he even was taken into office. And the fact that anybody ever believed that, to me, is ridiculous, because Trump in 2017, 2018 was the first person to send actual United States munitions and arms to Ukraine in the first place. So this idea that he was going to come in and just magically end the war, I never fell for that.
Let's end this on Moldova some more. What people listening to this, largely in America, but there's some from all over. What can we do besides, maybe just make people aware of what's going on, the situation? Have you spoken with people there that have said, like, if this could happen from outside of our country, this would help?
I think the biggest thing that would help genuinely is like clerical denunciation of what's happening, like of the Bessarabian metropolis, for example. So I would encourage everybody, I can send this to Buck if he wants to link them below.
Yes.
Listen to Dimitri and I's episode. It's fully free episode of Ether Hour about the situation in Moldova. Read Charles Bausman's Substack article about it, which I think is the best thing to send to people that don't understand what's going on. And the most important people you can send this to are your priests and bishops. Like, if you have a priest that has influence, if you have a priest with social media, if you have a priest that knows his stuff, if you have a close relationship with your bishop, send them this stuff. Because if our bishops speak up about this, and if the American bishops, which one thing about America, we've got almost all the jurisdictions here, so we can sort of have a dialogue. We can all kind of hash it out based on our different opinions and backgrounds and relations with the old country. If enough American bishops start talking about this, the people on the ground in Moldova might be like, oh, dang, we should probably tone it back a little bit, or else people are going to start to really see what's going on. And I think that would be one of the most effective ways that we can fight back. I mean, obviously, if you are close with the government representatives, talk to them. I just have extremely little faith that anybody currently working in the governmental system was going to have any way to influence what's going on here. But I think bishops, in particular, American bishops, have the freedom to talk about this. And if they talk about it, their voice would be heard all over the place, including in the Romanian church, because I'm sure there are people in Romania, priests, maybe even bishops, that also don't necessarily support what's going on. And if they saw other bishops from other jurisdictions talking about it, maybe they'd feel emboldened to condemn what their church is doing as well. Yeah,
because a lot of it's sort of happening in the shadows, if you will, and it's not making news over here. And so, I think knowledge of it, and people with clerical power of some sort, more than you and I, speaking about it would help.
You guys are the successors of the apostles. You had hands laid on you. In this situation, you have the power.
Yeah, well said. How's the food over there?
I mean, there's so much. The thing about Russia is there's Russian food, but then there's so many foods from the other, former Soviet republics. Like, some of my favorite food to eat here is Georgian food. You have some khachapuri, you have some Georgian wine that is super delicious. I love it. Russians, in my opinion, make delicious chicken noodle soup, which is like my favorite food ever. So I really enjoy it. That being said, I've been here for 3 weeks, and I sometimes miss my American goy slop. So I just had someone bring me a hamburger earlier. So
how was it?
It was good. It was apparently one of the better hamburgers they have in Moscow. It's very delicious. So there's good food here. I had a delicious steak the other night. There's a lot. If you love fish more than I do, I'm getting, as I've become Orthodox, I've gotten more and more into fish. A lot of amazing fish here. I do like caviar. Obviously, Russia's like the home of caviar. So there's a lot of really good stuff in that vein. Moldova had delicious food. Moldova is a famous wine country. And this first priest we went to, who had his office bugged, oh my gosh, he made us drink so much wine. It's like, it's all the toasts and just keep drinking. Got to finish this bottle to try the next one. Yeah. And man, I was totally drunk by the end of it, totally not planning to do so. But man, was it some delicious wine. So I encourage people, if you go to your local wine store, maybe ask them to get some Moldovan reds, because they're quite delicious.
I'm going to. You've already got me wanting this, just hearing that. Have you been out to, this sounds so American, but just cultural things like just bars or I don't know, are you at restaurants? What is it like, that sort of thing?
It's not that different from anywhere else you'd go. Like the bar, we've been to a few bars. There's, look, in Moscow, which Moscow is one of the more diverse parts of Russia. I mean, one of the things you'll notice is everyone's white, and you'll see it's, there's a lot less loud people yelling, if you understand what I mean by that. And in general, people in Russia smile a lot less, for example, than they do in America. So people might seem a bit more serious, but that actually has almost nothing to do with like if they're happy or sad or kind. It's sort of just a cultural thing. And people are actually quite helpful. I've had people notice that I don't speak the language and help me out. I've talked to people. And one thing that's funny about Russians is a lot of them do speak English, and they actually speak English quite well. But if they don't speak it like perfectly, they will just not do it and be like embarrassed to try to speak to you in English. Like this one girl I went with, she was in our group going to Donbass with me, Andre, their cameraman. She's his co-host on Spas TV. The first 2 days, she's like, oh, I just don't speak English. So I had Andre translate and we just didn't talk as much. And then finally we were in the car, just the two of us at one point, and she starts talking to me in English. I'm like, your English is perfectly fine. Like you can, like it was really not bad at all. Obviously it wasn't like fluent per se. She forgot a lot of words, but she could understand everything I was saying. She was totally able to have a back and forth conversation about simple things. And I'm like, don't be embarrassed. Like Americans don't know any languages. So you feel free to just do your thing.
Sometimes not even English. So.
Yeah. I mean, people told me that. They'd be like, your English is really good. And I'm like, well, I'd hope so. It's the only language I speak.
Yeah. Wait till you hear my Chinese. Plug anything you'd like. Social media presence, the show, of course, and Substack and everything.
So worldwarnow.co, that is our home base. That's our Substack. You can type in worldwarnow.substack.com and the same website will pop up. That's where you can subscribe for free, get on the email list, hear every episode. You can also get behind the paywall, which I really would hope everybody can do, because when I go on these trips, there's a bit of a content dip because I'm so busy. And when I don't give the pay pigs their paid content, people start to unsubscribe. So if you support what I'm doing, if you support this original reporting in Moldova, if you support me sort of putting it all on the line to be persecuted by the American state to cover this stuff, please consider getting behind the paywall and supporting World War Now at worldwarnow.co. You can follow World War Now almost everywhere where podcasts are found: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. World War Now Telly is our Telegram channel. At World War Now _ is our X page. I'm on X at GnomeRad, so it's like a gnome, garden gnome, then RAD. You can find me on there. And yeah, follow me. I'm going to be posting more and more stuff about my trip to the Donbass very, very soon. Videos I got of jets flying by, drones, interviews with people, very high-ranking people. Like I said, Deputy Foreign Minister of Donbass, the Metropolitan of Gorilovka, members of the Alexander Nevsky Volunteer Brigade, who right now are actively fighting on the front line. Very, very fascinating people. Stuff that, most Donbass, it's all from a very orthodox perspective. Most Westerners that have come to the Donbass, maybe they're tangentially interested, but I haven't really seen a full-on, focused Orthodox journalist come and do their reporting from that perspective. So follow me on the socials, get behind the paywall, because a huge amount of content in that vein is going to be coming very, very soon.
Excellent. Well, Conrad, stay safe over there, man. We shall talk soon. Thanks for being here on Counterflow.
Thanks, Buck. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you to Conrad for doing this, giving us the on-the-ground report in Russia. And I should say, by the way, on the previous episode, I did forecast that our buddy G.M. Davis, the author of the book Antichrist, was going to be on. He had a family emergency. He will be on in the future. We are rebooking that currently. But next week is a really good one. It's a fascinating tale from a young lady. To avoid further death threats, she will be using a voice disguiser. And I don't believe we will be seeing her either, as that would make sense that we wouldn't. So there's a little taste of what you're in for next week. As for this show, subscribe to the YouTube page, if you will. Hit that like button. Leave a comment if you'd like. Certainly, a lot of you do like doing that, even the haters out there. I love that term. I don't love that term. I hate that term. Follow me on X at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. And go subscribe to Conrad's Substack, the World War Now guys. Him and Dimitri. It's a lot of good content. Until next week, you guys have a good one.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been